Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I thank you for the opportunity for civil society to present at this thematic discussion. I speak on behalf of one of the largest and oldest human rights organizations in Central and Eastern Europe and Central Asia, and thus I address the topic of today's conversation from the region where many people who use drugs experience criminalization, stigmatization, and marginalization. While responses to the world drug situation should remain in full conformity with standards introduced in the UN human rights documents and treaties, what we have observed for decades was the opposite. In its report released last month, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights recognized that zero-tolerance drug policies have had a significant impact on the enjoyment of human rights. In our region, national drug laws often prioritize punishment over support to people who use drugs. In some countries, criminalization contributes to arbitrary arrest and detention, prolonged pretrial detention, failure to ensure a fair trial, compulsory drug testing or treatment, police violence and harassment, and more. Thus, we welcome the OHCHR recommendations to decriminalize drug use and possession and ensure proportionate sentences, to end the militarization of drug control and ensure that law enforcement efforts are fully consistent with states' human rights obligations. In CECA, like in other contexts, women, youth, specific ethnic groups, and people living in poverty are disproportionately affected by punitive drug control. In some countries, repressive drug laws have become a tool to harass not only people who use drugs, but also opponents of authoritarian regimes, free media journalists, human rights defenders, and civil society organizations. Only 17% of the Eurasian population enjoy partial freedom, while the other 83% are not free. For the 19th consecutive year, democratic governance has suffered an overall decline in the region stretching from Central Europe to Central Asia. A combination of the punitive approach to drugs and authoritarianism can be truly devastating. When space for civil society in general is shrinking, it becomes almost non-existent for those working in drug policy and harm reduction. Barriers are created for NGO registration, public action, and advocacy. Activists and leaders are unjustifiably harassed and arrested. NGOs find themselves under surveillance and punished for receiving financial or technical support from abroad or for contacting international institutions. It has sometimes resulted in the closure of life-saving methadone programs and harm reduction services. And so, people who use drugs continue to be highly affected by preventable infections. The AHV epidemic in EECA continues to grow, with 1/3 of new infections associated with injecting drug use. In this context, we call on you to implement the OHCHR recommendations to ensure the protection of the right to health for all across the region and globally by providing access to gender-sensitive medical care, voluntary treatment, and harm reduction, both in the community and in prisons. I conclude by noting yet another recommendation of the High Commissioner to ensure the consistent incorporation of human rights in the work of international drug control mechanisms. Human rights should be at the heart of 2024 midterm review and of international drug policy more generally. I thank you.